All right, guys, for this special installment of the Brink and Clink History Hour, we are going to visit some local Native American earthworks that were made by groups that were part of the Mississippi Mound Builders, which we talked about earlier in the week. All right, guys, so back here at the very back of the campground at Houston Woods, there is an Adena Indian mound. And the Adena people were the people that were here in this area of Ohio up until about 400 CE, okay? And there are mounds just like this one all over Southwest Ohio. Here in a little bit, we are gonna kick it out to Mr. Brink, who is up at Fort Ancient, and he's gonna give you a pretty good tour of all of the different things that they have up there at that museum that show you what life was like for the Adena and Hopewell cultures. But I wanted to start here because this is right in our backyard, right here at Houston Woods. This mound is what they would call a conical mound, like a cone because it's round. So the park here has kept this area clear around the mound so that you can walk around and see the mound in its entirety. And over the years, there have kind of been some different theories about what to do with the mound itself. It has never actually been excavated, which means that no archaeologists or scientists or anyone has ever dug into it to see what is actually inside this mound. It's probably a burial mound, but within that burial mound, there are going to be tons and tons of artifacts from the daily life of the Adena people. Also, over the years, the park itself has had different theories about how to care for the mound. It has been completely clear in the past with no trees other than these giant ones here on the edges that you might see. They have left it to just grow up. But currently, the thought is they are keeping it mostly clear to try to prevent any erosion and degradation that tree roots and things like that might cause to the contents of the mound. There is no longer a fence surrounding the mound. There used to be a fence around the mound, and it was kind of protected it. At one point, there was even a path that you could walk over top the mound. So it's kind of depended year by year how they decided to care for this mound because, again, the goal is to maintain it as the sacred place that it is. Now, I am going to set the camera down here. I'm going to make a little tripod in the woods so you can kind of get an idea of how tall the mound itself actually is. Okay, guys, I am standing here at the base of the mound. You can see behind me that the little saplings there that are on top of the mound, since they're so tiny, clearly they haven't been there very long. And the base of those saplings is well above my head. I know I'm not very tall. I'm only like 5'4", but this mound is well over 10 feet, probably closer to 15 feet tall, just to give you a little frame of reference. All right, guys, as we go on around the mound here, I just want to talk a little bit about the construction of these mounds, and Mr. Brink is going to touch on it again later. But we are talking about hundreds of man hours that it would take to build a mound this size, because all of it would have had to been done by hand. The natives would have had to use whatever tools they had, probably a jawbone, maybe a shell, or some other kind of bone to dig out the dirt and then put it in baskets and haul it. The dirt probably was from the riverbank near 4 Mile Creek. 4 Mile Creek is about a half a mile from this spot right here. So it would have taken lots of guys a long time to build this. This was not an overnight kind of thing. Now, guys, these big trees that are here on the south side of the mound, these are birch trees, and you're going to hear when we get to Fort Ancient about birch trees, but just know that this was the size of the tree that was used. Later on, we're going to talk about birch tree canoes, and they were an amazing resource for the natives. And then as we get back to the front of the mound here, or at least the front when you walk in from the campground, just another little fun fact about 4 Mile Creek. 4 Mile Creek's original Native American name was Talawanda. That sounds a little bit familiar. And it means winding water. If you ever look at a 4 Mile Creek on a map, it is the craziest, most winding body of water that you will ever see. There is definitely not a straight shot anywhere on that creek's path. So Talawanda comes from it is the native word for winding water, which is now 4 Mile Creek and the name of our district. So we are going to go from here and head down to Riley because, like I said, there are mounds like this all over Southwest Ohio. Maybe right even in your backyard and you don't realize it. All right, guys, as we come up on this Indian mound here in Riley at the Indian Creek Metro Park, you can see that it is a lot smaller than the one at Houston Woods. It's still kind of that conical shape. I'm going to walk around it so you can see here. But it is a much shorter mound than the one at Houston Woods. To the point that if you didn't know what it was, you would never guess. However, it is definitely been proven that it is an Indian mound. Now, when you see a smaller mound like this, you can definitely see how the settlers that came into this area, and even now, people that own land, wouldn't even know that they had an archaeological treasure like this on their property because it just looks like a hill at this one. Like I said, we're down here at Indian Creek Metro Park, and it's called that because it sits right along Indian Creek. Just like the mound at Houston Woods was along 4 Mile Creek, this mound is also is near Indian Creek. And that's important because all these indigenous peoples in the eastern woodlands here lived near lakes and streams because traveling was so much easier when you had water. We saw the birch trees back at Houston Woods. You're going to see some canoes later on at Fort Ancient. And it's not an accident that these mounds are near creeks because that is where these groups of people lived. So if you're ever down in Riley, I highly suggest taking the Indian Mound Trail and coming and checking it out.
Hey everybody. Hey, I came up here to Fort Ancient. It's up here in, it's north of Morrow, Ohio. It's Oregonia, Ohio. You know, it is the largest earthworks in North America. We're talking about the Indian lifestyle before Columbus got here. So I wanted to show you a few things, and we'll keep talking, but right now I'm behind the museum where they've kind of rebuilt what a typical house would look like. Okay, this would be like what they call their winter shelter. This would be more or less like a summer shelter, and they would move within this area. They had, winter quarters, they had the spring quarters over by their gardens and whatnot. I'm gonna walk inside here real quick and let you take a look and see how scary it is in here. Once I get my big body inside this place, it's just mud and stick walls, okay, with a thatch roof. And of course, this would be maybe like a bed area, okay. Up on top, again, could be like a bunk bed or where they would store certain products or items. Usually the fire would have been by the door, unless they had a hole in the roof where the smoke could escape. But most cooking would have been done outside. It would not have been done inside, okay? So let me pause this for a second. Let's go back outside and see what's going on. Right here you can see we have a little dugout canoe. Typically this is what it looked like, and this is probably about the right size, even though there's no way that I am getting anywhere inside that canoe. Water travel was still the easiest way to go anywhere, and they could still trade with other cultures, other tribes in different places. The Fort Ancients were some of the first ones to farm, use agriculture. Instead of chasing around animals all day long, they would actually just sit there and grow their garden. Now this is the typical, what they would call the Three Sisters garden. If you see here, it's not like a giant field of corn, okay? Basically, you can't see them on the ground here, but there's little mounds of dirt. And on top of the mounds of dirt, they would plant some corn seeds. And then around the base of the mounds, they would plant the squash, the watermelon, the pumpkin, whatever they were gonna grow, a vine plant. And then they would grow either some kind of bean or some kind of vine that would climb up the corn stalks. So you can see right there, you have these little purple flowers that are climbing up these corn stalks. And those were the Three Sisters: corn, squash, and then the beans. And we're gonna get more into that as the year goes on, but for right now, that is a typical Native American style garden. Okay, so what we have here now, these would be like more or less a workstation. Okay, anything could be done here. Probably more or less a station for either making tools or for processing the meat. You know, right here, this is like a natural arbor where they would grow their gourds. You can see they got some of those bird feeder type gourds. You know, those could be harvested and they could make, you know, ladles out of them. They could make little pots out of them, whatever they wanted to make, and pick those. Also around here, you'll see these are the little gardens plots, different things that they would grow. And a lot of it was weeds, and what we would call weeds today, but they would use them for food. Again, probably some type of workstation. You can see inside here that hollowed out log right there is where they would put the corn in and they would mash it with that stick to make cornmeal. Over here, most likely, was a drying rack. If they're trying to tan some hides or roast some meat or smoke some meat, they would do it there. Sunflowers were a big part of their diet. And I'm not sure what these are, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Hey guys, I'm inside the museum now, and I wanted to show you this neat little diorama they had made of a typical Fort Ancient style village. If you'll notice, you know, in the top of all of these little huts and houses there are holes, again, for your chimney, for the smoke to escape. The big one in the center most likely would be some kind of meeting house or, you know, their prayer worship house. You have gardens over here on the side. You have your dugout canoes being made over here next to the water. You have your little burial ground right here. So this is a really nice little depiction of life and the culture of the Fort Ancient Indians. There's a little, looks like a little kiln. They were doing some kind of clay pottery stuff. Over there, they're drying some skins. Okay, so everybody had a job. Everybody worked together. And you can see their wall was like this pickets, okay? And those pickets would be anywhere from 15 to 20 feet high. And how you got in and out was they built a narrow little walkway. That was their gate to get in and out of every little village they would build in. This is not the dugout canoe I was showing you outside. This is a much more sophisticated model. They call this as a river birch canoe. Basically, if you look inside, you see like these little wooden slats here. And this was developed more into the Northeast Indians. The Iroquois are the ones that made these famous. But as, you know, Indians developed, and also with the introduction of French and English fur traders and trappers in the area, these canoes here became the mode of transportation, okay? The slats here make the canoe very lightweight. And what they did was they took birch trees, the bark off of birch trees, which is very thin, but again, if you wrap it and layer it on there, it becomes very strong and very watertight. Now you see these black lines here. Those are the seams of the pieces of bark. And what they did was they took what they call pine pitch. And the recipe for that would be some pine sap, it was some ash from a fire, a little bit of clay, and some water. There's a recipe for it. And they would mix that up into some like almost like a tar-like substance. And then when it hardened, it would harden like epoxy, like Gorilla Glue. And that was not coming apart. The only way this canoe would break is if it hit one big giant rock and poked a hole into the bark siding. And again, you could patch it with the pine pitch. But that was a really most effective way of traveling. And this is a very large canoe. I mean, you can fit a lot of stuff in here. So if you had fur and whatnot to trade and travel, this is the way to go. Hey, I wanted to show you this. This is a wampum belt. Now, you know, for Fort Ancient and Ohio Indians, this wampum belt, this is not like it was used by the Iroquois on the East Coast. The Wampanoag and Hidatsa Indians, they used it more for money. This, for the Ohio Indians, is more like a, what do you want to call it, a passport or like a travel log, a family history type. And basically, all those things are, there's little tiny beads in there, are just shells. And it was very hard to make, and they were very fragile, but once they got together, they were super, super strong. So we'll see a little film on this, how they make these in person, but I wanted to show you one here at the museum so you can at least see that even though they're more of an East Coast style where shells are more prevalent, they did make it all the way out here to the Ohio Indians. They did use these in their travels and in their trades. Okay, so here we are, we're in Fort Ancient now, or outside. People get confused why it's called Fort Ancient, because it's not a fort. It's hard to see right now. There are earthen walls all around here. And it's sort of like Cahokia when we watched on Tuesday. You know, the Cahokia was like a cultural center. When this was discovered by white people in the early 1800s, well, they thought those giant walls on the outside of Earth was like a fort. And it was ancient, so it was called Fort Ancient. Even though it was mostly made by the Hopewell Indians and they left, then another culture moved in and lived here for a while, and then again, that was the Fort Ancient culture. There's no warlike purpose of this place. It was more or less a city probably like Cahokia where some Indian tribes lived. It was a trade center because the Little Miami River is very nearby. It was up on high ground, so it had natural protection to begin with. So this was probably a huge hub of activity for a long time. So we're just going to kind of walk around a little bit, see a few things in the area, and then we'll put the whole video together for you guys to watch. All right, so we're back here in the woods here. What you're looking at, that is the wall that surrounded Fort Ancient. Now right now that wall is only like 13 feet high. And of course there's trees and everything else that have been growing in it for hundreds of years. But when it was originally made, when it was first discovered back in the 1800s, those walls were 27 feet high. You know, and over years of rain and trees and erosion, it kind of shrunk. But right now, I mean, most people guess they might have been 30, 35, 40 feet high. But that is the outer wall of the Fort Ancient area, okay? So right here, you can barely see what this is, but right here, there are stones in the ground and they're laid out in a circle. So there's no trees planted here, nothing grows here. They don't know why these circles are here. Over the years, there's been all kind of speculation that it was sort of like a Stonehenge moment, or, you know, was it some kind of secret meeting spot that it lined up with the sun at a certain angle. Nobody really understands why or what, but you can see at one point in time, these trees probably were not here, except for that giant monster right there. This is more of an open field, okay? But nobody understands. There's a circle here, and there's a circle over there, and we'll try to show you some more stuff as we go through here. If you want, it says here, the hope of it varies several stone circles within the earthworks, and some are visible today. Understand why? Don't really know. 16 feet in diameter. Could have been the foundation for a house. Who knows? Real good view of the outer wall of Fort Ancient here as we're walking through the woods. It's, again, it's not as high as it would have been. I mean, try to imagine that thing twice as tall. Okay? And the trees, the smaller ones, obviously, not here. And the funny thing is, to make these walls, you got clamshells, antlers, maybe the shoulder blade of an elk. Those are your tools. And you had to dig up dirt from probably down by the river, carry it up in a basket, and then dump it. Most people seem to believe that these things took, oh my gosh, 200 to 300 years to build. And it's like 100 guys working 100 hours for years just to build these walls. And again, you gotta believe it's not a fort, it's more of a cultural center. It was a place to worship, and we'll talk more about that when we get into class about, did they build it to get higher to the sun, closer to the sun? We'll find out later. You guys are taking a drive from the north part of the Fort Ancient area down to the southern part. Now the northern part was built first, but you can see here in my car, this is the outer wall. You can see how it rises. And again, these walls here are probably only about 10 feet high. But they just go straight up. Oh, it's like you can just tell it's a wall now. And it's real thin. It's not very wide. If you go here to the other side of my car, there they are on that side. There's not much to it here. Okay, so it really wasn't meant to be a huge fort. It was just meant to be just a place where, you know, people could worship or gather. This is the last thing we're going to say up here at Fort Ancient today. I wanted to show you the mounds. You know, the walls, you know, the earthen walls, again, nobody understands what they were for. They could have been for protection. I doubt it. Most likely it was just to try to keep, you know, animals in or animals out, have a nice place to garden, a little shelter, a little safety. This is the burial mounds. Now, the mounds that these Indians made had different properties or different purposes. For example, this one here, this was called a calendar mound. And different mounds on this site seem to line up with the sun and stars in a certain way that you can eliminate, you know, like there are two mounds here. I didn't find them today, but there are two mounds where the summer solstice sun sets directly in between them. So these mounds here today, some of them are mounds, okay? Some of them are calendar mounds that mark different periods of the year, and the Indians would have festivals around those mounds when it was time to harvest, when it was time to plant, when it was time to pick the green corn, when it was still like, that would be their version of sugar corn, sweet corn. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I didn't try to make it too silly, but we'll talk to you in class here real soon.